I'm a big believer in second chances, even for people who commit serious crimes. Who deserves a second chance? Who gets one? And who decides? I'm Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host of Just Justice. I'm a former public defender, a professor of justice studies, and an award-winning author. And I'm excited for us to find new ways to put justice back into our criminal legal system. Hello and welcome to Just Justice. My name is Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host. Today on Just Justice, we're joined by Felix Rosado, a restorative justice practitioner, author, and educator whose life challenges the very foundation of how we think about accountability and punishment. At the age of 18, Felix pled guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to mandatory life without parole in Pennsylvania. He spent nearly 27 years in prison, during which time he earned his college degree from Villanova University and rediscovered his Catholic faith. After his sentence was commuted in 2022, Felix was released and has become a powerful force for change. Felix, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica.
So I guess let's go back in time to sort of where this story begins, this part of the story begins, which is when you were 18 and you were charged with a fatal shooting, you were charged with first-degree murder, and you pled guilty and were sentenced to life without parole. I got a little tripped up on that. Why would you plead guilty if the sentence was life without parole? It doesn't sound like you got much of a benefit there, which is sort of the purpose of plea bargaining.
Yeah, I got some really bad advice from my attorney. He strongly suggested I plead guilty. On day three of my trial, I had already elected to go to trial. Uh, some new evidence had surfaced throughout the process, and he came to me the third morning as I walked into the courtroom and said, "Look, you really have no chance. I think you should plead guilty. The judge is willing to drop the extra charges. You'll get life without parole and you'll be home in 15, 20 years." And I still said no to it at the time. It wasn't until we broke for lunch and I was in the holding cell downstairs in the courtroom, in the courthouse, and I started to really think about it. And he came down again and urged me even more. And I just kind of gave in and said, "Okay, let's go do it." And we went upstairs, we pled guilty, and I got sentenced to what I now know as death by incarceration. I no longer call it life.
Well, you said when you pled guilty that you didn't really understand what quote unquote life meant for you. How did you learn sort of the reality of what you had pled guilty to, what life without parole really meant for your 18-year-old self?
Yeah, so I got condemned to death by incarceration at age 18 and I got sent upstate. And I landed at Graterford State Prison, which was the country's fifth largest prison at the time, and was notorious for drugs, for violence, for corruption. And I got thrown into this place and had to figure things out pretty quickly. I still remember my first day there. I was walking down Graterford's notorious main corridor. Uh, there were at least 1,000 people out walking back and forth, doing all kind of things. I watched a fight break out, and the CO walked me and like four or five other guys who had got transferred altogether down this corridor to the cell block we were going to be on. And once we got there, another officer picked us up, walked us up to a table, uh, dumped a trash bag full of brown, wrinkled uniforms onto the table, said, "Find something that fits you," and walked away. And that was our
Mm.
orientation to state prison. I finally found something. I made it to the control center. I found out what cell I was going to be in, and I went to it, and I met my new cellmate. His name was Tito. He had 5 years in on his death by incarceration sentence. Again, we were calling it life at the time. And I thought that 5 years was just a crazy amount of time to have served.
Yeah.
Uh, and we were standing out in front of the cell, and he was kind of telling me, what to do, what not to do. And at the time, we were allowed to wear regular clothes. You could order it have it mailed in, and wear it throughout the day. So these guys were walking laps around the block, and they caught my attention. They looked old, but they also looked like they were still in the 70s, and it was 1996. And
Mm.
these guys had these huge bell bottoms on and these butterfly collars and these humongous afros. Uh, Only some of your listeners will actually know what I'm talking about. But I remember thinking to myself, what is the story with these dudes? And I turned to my new cellmate. I said, "Hey, what's their whole thing?" And he said as nonchalant as ever, "That's Skip. He's been here 35, and the other guy, his name is Jojo. He's been here 38 or something like that." And my heart dropped. My
Mm.
18-year-old brain couldn't fathom a human being caged twice as long as I had been alive.
Mm-hmm.
So my next question to Tito was, how many life sentences do they have?
Right.
Two, three? And he looked me in the eye. He said, "Little brother, they have what you have." And that's when it hit me. And that's when it became real. And I tried to play it cool. I didn't want to seem naive, but inside I was shook. And
Oh, yeah, I can
the next day I was in the
imagine.
law library trying to overturn my conviction. And the fight for my freedom started that day.
Wow. And I know that you've written that those first few years, actually more than a few, probably 8 or 9 years, were
Mhm.
really rough for you
Yeah.
inside. Um, and I'm wondering what changed for you? Like it sounds like you really had a rough beginning in
Yeah.
prison. What is it that changed for you? Do you
Yeah,
remember?
well, I was trying to adapt to this twisted environment where everything that's good is bad and everything that's bad is good and nothing really makes sense. And I'm trying to figure it out. And I'm also trying to figure out who I am. I'm
Right, because
18 years old. I'm trying
you
to,
were
who
only
who am I?
18.
And
Yeah,
so I'm going
yeah.
through that process. And my freedom fight started going nowhere fast. I was paying guys cartons of cigarettes to file briefs on my behalf. My case was getting more and more messed up. I was time barred. My issues weren't going anywhere, and hopelessness quickly set in. And I started smoking weed. And before long, I was up to my street habit. I was smoking every
Mm.
single day. I was getting in a lot of trouble. I was in and out of the restricted housing unit, aka the hole, solitary confinement for when you break any of the millions of rules inside the prison. So I was stuck in a cycle of going to the hole for 90 days, coming out for a couple months, going back for another 90. I did that for almost 9 years straight.
Mm.
And then I had this moment when I was in the hole, actually. I was serving 90 days. It was my last one in 2004. I had 9 years in at the time, and I was 27. And I remember laying in my on my bunk one afternoon. The wing was quiet. Everyone was asleep because people stay up all night and sleep all day down in the hole. And I was just laying there. I couldn't sleep. And I remember suddenly asking myself some tough questions that I had never asked myself before. I started wondering about my legacy. What is this all going to mean? Who's going to remember me?
Mm.
And at some point, I asked myself, how did I get here? How did I get from being a straight A student deemed gifted in elementary school to this? And I started to trace my steps back in life, and I ended up identifying some key moments when things took a serious downward turn.
So
And
can I jump in here for a minute? So
yeah,
I think you just said something that's really interesting, right? So you were somebody who at an early age was identified as gifted in school, which I assume came with some extra programming, some extra bells and whistles. So how did you sort of go from being a gifted student to someone who got caught up in the criminal legal system at such a young age?
yeah. Well, I grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania. It's one of America's poorest cities. Number one back in 2010. I'm not sure where it's ranking these days, but it was a big manufacturing town, 60s and 70s. All the factories left. Heroin and crack replaced them. And this is the context in which I grew up and came of age. Uh, I went to a pretty decent elementary school. The neighborhood I grew up in was bordered the white section of the city.
Mm.
the city now is like 80 something percent Latinx. And it was growing at the time to become that. But I went to a decent school and they actually didn't deem me gifted there. It wasn't until, and I was a straight A student. It wasn't until we moved to the other side of town and went to a way worse school where I ran into a teacher who actually saw my potential and decided to test me. Uh, and so I always, in hindsight, I think that's really interesting, right?
Hmm.
The white school didn't give me a chance, but the black and brown school did. Um,
That is
and
interesting.
so yeah, I was projected by my family to be the first one to go to college. My grandmother uh, migrated from Puerto Rico to Reading, Pennsylvania in the early 70s with her 16 children.
Oh my
So
goodness.
they were ages 3 to 23 at the time.
Oh
Put them
my
all on an
goodness.
airplane and came out here in search of what she thought was going to be a better life for everyone, right? We left the luscious green mountains of central PR to come to this, right? Thinking that there were going to be jobs and all these opportunities for us. Uh, that wasn't the case. But I had a big family. We did everything together. Those 16 children, my aunts and uncles and my mother, went on to have 47. So I
My
have
goodness.
so many cousins, right? And if we want to keep going, that 47 has like 70 something right now, and that 70 something has like eight. So
Wow.
big, huge family. We grew up together. When we started to when we were when my like age group started to become like 8, 9, 10, we all started to move to different parts of the city, and th that's where things really went left. I ended up in a neighborhood uh, that was the heroin uh, like capital of the city. And so this is what I saw on my way to and from
Mm,
school every
mm-hmm.
single day. Around the corner was the busiest heroin corner in the city. And like I had to walk past there. And midway through junior high, uh, what I was seeing on my way to and from school was capturing much more of my attention than anything that was happening inside those classrooms. Uh, sc- School was actually it was easy, and I would get bored a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was seeing on the streets was fascinating me. And so little by little, I started hanging out, and at age 14, I made my first cocaine sale. And it built up to that. First, I was just stealing from the corner store, then shoplifting to get the kind of clothes I couldn't afford, and then breaking into cars and stealing cars and smoking weed and drinking and hanging out. And eventually, it all led to me making this sale at 14 and just falling in love with it. The money, the
Mm.
power, all the things I didn't have anywhere else in my life, I had there. And turns out I was pretty good at it. I rose up the ladder quickly. Uh, by the time I was 17, I had corners, I had spots, I had people working for me, I had more money than I knew what to do with. But also, a lot of problems came with that lifestyle. And so I had to look over my shoulder constantly. I couldn't sleep at night. And eventually, I had to start carrying guns and using them. And committed a murder that landed me in prison and uh, sentenced to death by incarceration at age 18.
Mm. Wow, that is a story that is painful to actually listen to.
Mm,
That's painful. It's hard. Um, but the interesting thing for you, I think, is that while you're in prison,
mhm.
you're struggling at first, but your basic brilliance is still intact, and at some point, you have access to an educational program, and you went on to get your degree from Villanova
Yeah.
while you were incarcerated. Now, anybody, Villanova's a great school no matter how you slice it, whether you're incarcerated or on the
Yeah.
outside. So that's quite an accomplishment. And I'm wondering, what role did that education play in reshaping how you saw yourself, how you saw your future, even within the confines of a life without parole sentence?
Played a huge role. After I had that encounter in the hole in 2004, when I decided I had to try something different because what I was doing wasn't working, I came out with a new focus, and I decided to stop getting high. I left alone a lot of the bad habits I was into. Stopped hanging with a lot of the people I was hanging with, and I discovered this whole new part of the prison I didn't even know existed. Right, like there were so many different programs and opportunities, and I was just in stuck in a cycle of going out to the yard and coming back to the cell block, and getting into trouble. So I actually started working in the prison chapel. Uh, and so I decided at some point I needed to get serious about a relationship with God. I reached out to the Catholic chaplain at the time. He called me down. We talked. A couple of days later, he offered me a job in the chapel. I took it. And so suddenly I was around guys much older than me, guys who were in their 50s and 60s. I was like 29 at the time. And these guys also had like over 35 years in,
Mm,
40 years in. I had 12, I think, then. Uh, and so I was around these guys who were showing me through their example how to live a life of meaning and selflessness. And I really liked it. I enjoyed coming to work, and two of the two or three of my coworkers in particular were part of this program where they used to talk with boys from a nearby juvenile hall who would get brought into the prison once a month to
mm,
hear from this group of guys about what their lives could look like if they continued doing what they were doing. And so they used to come to work and talk about this every time they had one of the sessions. And I was intrigued. Like it's something I really wanted to do, but I had this fear of public speaking and I didn't think I'd be good at it. And I kept talking
mm,
myself out of it. And one day I was in the cell and the urge was so strong that before I could talk myself out of it, I went to the staff person who was in charge of the program. I said, "Hey, what do you think about me participating in this?" He lit up. He said, "You're still kind of young. You're Puerto Rican. You're from Reading. The kids are gonna love you. Uh, just come and observe," he said. You don't have to do anything. And if you feel moved the following month, you could share your story. So I came, and long story short, the one of the guys who likes to go last didn't know that I got these previous instructions to just chill. So before he went, he pointed at me and said, "You go." And all the eyes of the circle turned on me. And I could have either made a big deal about how I was just there to observe, or I could have just stood up and started talking. I did the latter. And I shared my story with the boys. And afterwards, they all came up to me with handshakes and hugs. And I, I couldn't believe that I had just done that. And that was a pivotal moment for me. It showed me that I could have an impact
mm,
despite being condemned to die there. Despite being behind that 30-foot high concrete wall, I could still affect someone's life. And that actually skyrocketed me into everything else I ended up doing. I learned about the Villanova bachelor's degree program. I I wrote the person in charge of it. I got accepted, and suddenly I was in school after having not sat in a classroom since high school. 12 or 13 years prior, I was I was taking classes, and these were in person. The professors come into the prison and teach us. And I just really want to lift up Villanova. They had this program at Graterford and now SCI Phoenix, the prison that replaced Graterford in 2018, since the early 70s. And when Pell Grants were taken in the mid 90s as part of the crime bill, uh, college programs in college programs in prisons shut down overnight, and Villanova continued to come on their own dime to Graterford. So 20 something years later, 30 years later, I learn about this program. I get in it, and I didn't know how well I was going to do. Like I was kind of nervous at first, and I still remember taking my first test and getting my first A and writing my first paper, getting my first A, and you know, feeling relief that I still had it because I didn't know.
right,
Uh,
right, of course.
and I ended up graduating summa cum laude and delivering the valedictorian speech. in front of a chapel full of family members and staff and uh, faculty from Villanova, and in front of my mom.
That's amazing.
When I went up there to get my degree, I came back down that middle aisle and handed it to her because she's the reason why any of this was possible. When I was in elementary school, she used to study with me at the kitchen table. And she taught me this study ethic that really came in handy in prison because we were surrounded by noise. Like we were
Yeah.
in a first floor apartment, people screaming outside, music blasting, all kind of stuff. One day, a corner of a brick came flying through our kitchen window while we were studying. And I still remember my stepdad running outside to try to catch who did it. My mom and I cleaned it up, put some plastic over the window, and sat down and kept studying, you know? And so when I was on that cell block in all that noise outside of my door, I was on the bottom tier. I was able to really zone in and do all the readings and write all the papers, and it was a good experience. I think it did help me out. I mean, not only do I have a college degree, which helps me with employment, but my degree was in interdisciplinary studies. Uh, so I got to take a lot of sociologies and histories and Englishes and philosophies and wide range of coursework uh, that really opened my eyes and gave me a sociological imagination and helped me to put things in context and taught me how to write better and read. And so yeah, I'm just really grateful. I just visited campus, recently. I feel at home when I go there. I'm still friends with many of my professors. So yeah, it was a real gift.
And so you just mentioned so you're visiting all these folks. So I guess it's not a spoiler anymore, but you had your sentence commuted in 2022. And
Mhm.
for listeners, I mean, who don't appreciate how rare that is, it's
Yeah,
really an unusual occurrence. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a
yeah,
little bit about how that whole process happened.
yeah. Well, as rare as rare as it is nationwide, it's even more rare in Pennsylvania. Uh, the door on that process had been completely shut for the first 2 decades of my incarceration because of something that happened a year prior to my arrest. Somebody came home through commutation, did something stupid. The next two or three governors didn't want didn't want to touch it. It wasn't even
Mm-hmm.
worth filing an application. And then a new governor came into office and commuted someone for the first time in over 20 something years. And he was in my prison.
Mm.
Uh, and he had over 35 years in, he was 65 plus, and he was the non-shooter, and I'm putting air quotes around it, in a second degree felony murder case. And
Okay.
that quickly became the unwritten standard for who was going to get it. The next five or six guys fit that same exact bill. And I wasn't any of those things. I had just turned 40. I had like barely 20 years in, and I had a first degree murder.
Mm-hmm.
But I decided I was going to try. I was I was appealing my conviction in the courts in a series of U.S. Supreme Court decisions in 2012 and 2016. It was ruled unconstitutional to sentence children to mandatory death by incarceration. And I missed that by 5 months. I was 18 and 5 months when I committed my crime. And Pennsylvania had the most, 550. And a couple hundred were in the prison I was in. So these were the guys I grew up with, right? We were all young together at the same time, and we were all going through our late teens and our 20s and our 30s together. And suddenly they were getting resentenced and going home. And I was stuck there because I committed my crime too late. But I was arguing that those decisions should apply to me. So I was in the courts, engaged in that fight. I was also part of a movement to get legislation passed so that everyone with this sentence could have a chance for parole uh, after a number of years. So I was fighting for my freedom uh, judicially, legislatively, and and so I was going to try the executive branch as well. Because that's what it takes to try to come home. You have to do it all. And so I decided to file an application. I worked on it for like 8 months myself. I put it in and I actually enjoyed it. Like, no longer was I talking about what my lawyer did or didn't do at court, what the judge did, what the DA did. Like, this was about here's what I did and here's who I am now. And this is why I think I should have a chance at freedom. So I gathered all my supporting documents. I ended up with around 150 support letters from people in the community. I ended up getting the prison's support and then the Department of Corrections support. And it was the furthest anyone my age had ever gotten. So all eyes were on me. They wanted to see what was going to happen with this application. Because if I got it, it meant that someone else could have a chance too, who wasn't 65 or 70 or in a wheelchair or on oxygen,
Mm-hmm.
because that's mostly who was getting a chance. So I filed my application and then radio silence for the next couple of years. In that time, Graterford closed and was replaced by SCI Phoenix, a new prison built right next door. So we got transferred over to this new prison. We're trying to figure out, this new environment that's especially oppressive, more so than Graterford was. And then my process begins. I start getting interviewed by the different people in the prison, psych department, chaplaincy, medical, parole, and ultimately it it came together in me getting the prison's recommendation. So again, I got as far as anyone had ever gotten. Uh, and then in 2020, we got locked down for COVID.
Right.
And that's when my process was really about to begin. So Pennsylvania has a board of pardons, a five-member board, two elected officials, and three governor appointees who have to unanimously uh, recommend an application to the governor. So without those five votes, you can't even get on the governor's desk. And it's really hard to get five people to agree on, something, especially when it's political by nature. Uh, the two elected officials on the board, the lieutenant governor and attorney general, are always seeking higher office. Those are stepping stone offices. So they're weighing their political careers on all of these decisions. But anyway, I get in front of them and I get granted a public hearing. I get interviewed by them. And this was at the end of 2020 in September. And when they voted, only I got 3 out of 5 votes and got denied. And I was devastated. And so was my family. And I mean, we had no opposition. My district attorney was supporting me. That's a
Mm,
whole other story, how we got that to happen. But uh yeah, that was hard. And so the next year, 2021, I filed for something called reconsideration, and that too got denied. And
mm,
then in 2022, I filed a second reconsideration request. I was actually about to start working on a whole new application, and it would have taken me 3 to 4 years to get to where I just was. I
mm,
wasn't thrilled
mm.
about that. And then I heard about someone who had attempted a second reconsideration request. And it didn't go anywhere, but it let me know that it was a thing. And
Right.
so I worked on one of those. I put that in 2022. I got granted another public hearing, which was a big deal. And I went in front of the board again and I got interviewed by them again. Both interviews were like an hour and a half long. They grilled me about everything you can imagine. I answered as best as I could, uh, every question. And the next day when they voted, I got all five. That was in April of 2022. It took another few months for the governor to sign off on July 14th of 2022. And then four days later, on July 18th of 2022, I walked out of SCI Phoenix free for the first time since I was 18 at age 45.
Wow. Yeah, that's a real story of persistence and resilience, right? And while you were incarcerated, and this sort of leads us to what you've been doing since you've been released, right? While you were incarcerated, you came across the idea of restorative justice,
Hmm.
and it really resonated with you. And I'm wondering why? Why, like, what was it about restorative justice that you found so appealing? And maybe you could just start out with a really brief
Yeah.
explanation of what that is.
Yeah. Well, restorative justice found me actually through a book uh, by Howard Zehr, who's written a lot on restorative justice and who's a dear friend of mine now. But I ended up reading this book for one of the classes I was in. It was a photo essay book of people who lost loved ones to violence. And I still remember sitting in my cell that afternoon with the book spread open across my lap, turning page after page and looking at face after face and reading heartbreaking story after heartbreaking story. And at some point, thinking to myself, I caused the family the same kind of pain that I was reading about. And it was something that I didn't want to think about for over a decade.
Mm,
And something that the system really prevents you from doing. It incentivizes deceit and punishes truth telling at every turn. From the moment the handcuffs get slapped on, you know if you start telling the truth just from watching any of the primetime propaganda dramas, you're going to find yourself in a world of trouble. So, we create these other versions of what happened, and that's what we tell the cops and the courts, and we start to internalize these alternate narratives. And here I was in the cell, face to face with this really hard truth. And I asked myself, now what? Like what do I do? What can I do? And at the end of the book, Howard starts talking about this thing called restorative justice, a way of doing justice that seeks to heal harm by involving those directly impacted by it, including the person who caused it. And that's the thing that really blew my mind. My initial reaction was, why didn't someone come up with this idea sooner?
mm.
And I quickly learned that people did before slavery and genocide and colonization. Like this is what folks were doing. So anyway, I was intrigued immediately because it gave me hope. It let me know that when the judge banged his gavel and sentenced me to death by incarceration, it wasn't the end of the story. There's still more that can
Mm.
happen and that needs to happen. So anyway, I started reading more books. My interest became a passion. I connected with someone else who had a similar passion. His name's Charles Boyd. He's still inside. He's in year 43 of his death by incarceration sentence.
Mm.
And we co-founded a restorative justice project. We set out on this mission to introduce as many other people in the prison to RJ as possible. And so we created an intro to restorative justice workshop. We started piloting it, and it got really good. And before long, we couldn't go anywhere in the prison without someone walking up to us with their name and numbers scribbled on a little piece of paper asking to be signed up. And as people were completing the workshop, they wanted to know what was next, and we didn't have anything. So we created an alumni project, an advanced workshop, a steering committee to guide the whole thing. And overnight, it just became a full-blown project, which is now called Let's Circle Up and is being built up out here on the outside as we speak.
And so restorative justice sort of does involve the person who caused harm speaking with the person or the person who was harmed or their family members.
Yeah.
Um, and I know in your particular case, you were unable to directly meet with the
Mhm.
victim's family.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm wondering, how does accountability in a restorative justice space work if there isn't an opportunity to
Yeah.
connect?
Yeah. What we were doing on the inside was restorative justice education. And one thing we learned is that it was as transformative as face-to-face encounters between responsible and harmed parties. Because we were doing a lot of things around accountability and harm and the impact of our actions on others. And we would read stories about people who had experienced hard losses. And uh, so that was part of my development. And how I came to like really understand accountability as something that should be active, the system provides a passive accountability where all you have to do is not escape, you know, and n never once have to think about the harm you caused. Uh, if you do that work, you do it despite the prison and the system, never because of. And fortunately, I was exposed to some things and some people that gave me an opportunity to do that inner work. But in Pennsylvania, you can't just reach out to the survivors of the people whose lives you took or any harm if it's not a murder. Uh, you're not allowed to reach out to the harmed parties in any case. Uh, and so there's a whole uh, department of a government agency called the Office of the Victim Advocate, and everything has to go through them. And they do have what's called the Victim Offender Dialogue Program,
Mhm.
but it's rarely used. I heard the waiting list is so long. There are no facilitators. It's not funded. Uh, so it just wasn't happening. And you have to be a member of this office of the victim's advocate, to even get to even be part of communication about like what the person on the inside is doing and stuff like that. And most people aren't, you know, most people know nothing about this. So anyway, there's hardly any opportunity for that. And but now that I'm home, I'm hoping that one day it's my prayer that one day I can have an encounter with the family.
Um, yeah, and so what does Let's Circle Up do now? How is that working? I know that you wrote a book
Yeah.
about restorative justice, a manual, Inside Up, a Restorative Justice Education Facilitator's Manual, which I will put in the show notes.
Mm,
But so what does Let's Circle Up do in practice today?
yeah. So like I said, we started out as a restorative justice education project. We just did our intro workshop, our advanced workshop, alumni project, and grew. We kept adding new parts to the project, and at some point I started writing the facilitator's manual because it was all in our heads, and I just wanted to put it down, you know, somewhere. Uh, and so while I was still inside, while I was still fighting a death by incarceration sentence, uh, connected with some wonderful folks at Living Justice Press through Howard Zare. He's the one who made the connection, and they they agreed to work with me under those conditions through letter writing and phone calls and editing the hard way. We started to put this thing together, and then the miracle of my freedom happened. The political stars aligned, and I was able to come home, and I finished it up out here, and we were able to publish it in 2024, a year after my release, 2 years after my release.
And
So
how
now
do
it's out
people?
there for anyone to pick up and facilitate an intro to restorative justice workshop in any setting. We decided early on that we weren't going to limit it to prison, that it was going to be applicable anywhere. And I've actually adapted the curriculum i- into a semester-long college course that I
Hmm.
teach at two schools out here in Philly. So same pedagogy. It's extremely experiential and fun. There are no lectures, no PowerPoints. We're learning from each other. We're doing creative activities. We're touching all parts of our brain. We're doing art. We're answering prompts with our bodies. We're doing small group, pair discussions. It's really lively. And we knew that it had to be on the inside because people weren't gonna come otherwise. It was 100% voluntary. There were no staff involved, just the inside team and a group of outside volunteers who would come in and help us. Uh, Now we're expanding. We're going to add a young adult restorative justice diversion program and something called restorative integration. So in the diversion program, we're going to get cases of people who've been arrested, and we're going to run them through our process, which is going to include them meeting with the people they harmed and working out a plan to put things more right. And then their charges are going to get dismissed afterwards. And then we're going to do something called restorative integration, where we're going to use restorative justice processes to help people transition from prison back home, by focusing on the relationships between them and their loved ones. So we're actually going to bring the loved ones into the prison, have a circle with the incarcerated person prior to them coming out, and then having another circle on the outside once the person comes home with the same people to talk about what the needs are and what harm has been done to the relationships. Something that a lot of people don't talk about, don't address. Then they come
Hmm.
home and find themselves in a lot of problems because of it. So we're seeing it as an unaddressed need that
Yeah,
restorative
that's
justice is specifically qualified to address.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, right? I mean, we think a lot about, and rightfully so, right? The people who were harmed by crime, but we don't focus very much on the harm that's caused between the person who caused harm and their own family members, and how
Absolutely. And
devastating that can really be.
people sit in visit rooms and never talk about it.
Mm,
My mother and I never had that conversation for the first 20 years of my incarceration.
wow.
And I still remember one day we were sitting there and she started telling me the story of how she had to leave her job downtown and work somewhere else after my arrest because of the news coverage and how people started treating her differently. And at the time, I thought she just wanted to work somewhere else. I didn't really know what it was all about. And like all these years later, she's telling me the story, and it really hit me that
Yeah.
I caused not only my community and an entire family and all that, a whole lot of pain, but like my own people and the people who I love, and the people I claim I would do anything for. I was causing the most hurt to. So anyway, that was we. I learned that to be true with all the guys I was talking about on the inside, talking with on the inside, and guys who were taking our workshops. We're talking about how these are conversations that just don't happen because we go through a lot to get a visit. We're getting strip searched on this end. They're going through the the ringer on that end. And once we finally come together, like we just want to have a good time. We don't want to talk about like all the pain and the hard stuff. And so we keep a lot of stuff from each other. So a circle is a good way to have those honest conversations and to really think about, what needs to happen to build those relationships back up because a lot of the quote unquote reentry work out here has to do with getting people employment and housing and all that stuff is so important. We need that. But this is an area that a lot of people or not many people are actually focusing on.
Felix, I know you're working currently at Healing Futures, a youth restorative justice diversion program. Um, what's happening there, and what's next for you?
Yeah, I'm blessed to have jumped into this job a week after my release. It was already set up for me to step right into. And I have the privilege of supervising an amazing